big word, misogynist, that God hates women. In fact, I have heard well-meaning and well-intentioned evangelicals, people who we might link arm in arm with on many things, would say, yeah, the God of the Old Testament does not like women. And like I said last week, that then begs the question, why did he create them? If his whole purpose was just to hate them. It makes no sense to me, but this is how some people view the God of the Old Testament. And you can understand why. I've even had recently in discussing this passage, a lady say to me, boy, I really don't like this text. I really don't like what's going on here. Because this text is dealing with vows and oaths. And if a person makes a vow or an oath, even if they make a vow or an oath to God, if a young lady is living in her father's house, the day that her father hears she made a vow, he can annul the vow. For this reason, the first question, and I get this more than what you think, but I get people calling me saying, hey, would you be willing to do our wedding? And the first question that I ask is, if it's a young man, I'll say, do you have her father's permission? If it's a young lady, I say, do you have your father's permission? And they always were like, oftentimes like, oh, no, or yeah, or kind of like, why are you asking this question? Why do I need that? And I always say, look, I'm telling you, I won't do the. I'm sure others will, but I won't perform the wedding or be a part of it until I know that your father is on board. And they look at me like, or they say to me, really? Like, wow. You have a question? Or just scratch your head?
Oh, I guess I'm just scratching.
Scratch your head, okay.
Wow.
Huh? Okay, sorry. Yes?
Something while I was reading this that really popped out at me today, though. In verse 15, where it says, and I hope I'm not praying anything.
No.
But if he does not make them void after he has heard them, then he shall bear her guilt.
Yes. Yes. Better read that. Yeah. So
that's a protection.
It's a protection. Yeah. In a culture where women can be taken advantage of and could be manipulated, it allowed for them to get out of something that put the whole family at danger, potentially. The husband, so it says the husband, upon hearing of a vow or of his wife, they could annul it, or a father could annul the vow of his daughter. Now, interestingly enough, divorcees and widows are free agents. Whatever they vow, whatever they say. But you know what this says to me? As I read this, one of the overarching things that this says to me is that we should be extremely careful in the promises we make. If we say to another person, I will do this for you, or I will whatever, we often talk about Lashon Hara in sense of evil speech directed at another person, saying something negative about another person. But another form of Lashon Hara is where you make a promise and then don't fulfill it. You build up the hopes of another person by your promise, by giving your word, and then you don't fulfill what you've promised to do. It says something else and I think we need to think this way, and that is that our word is who we are. You can't separate your word from who you are. You can't say, well, that was just my word, it wasn't me. That makes no sense. In the scriptures we have over and over again that the Holy One is tied to His word. I'll give you an example. Psalm 119, 105 says, the Torah is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. It's a lamp and a light. Then Psalm 27, 1 says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. So the Torah is a light, and Yeshua and Yahweh is a light. They're both alike. You can't separate him from his word. Neither can you be separated from your word. And if you give a promise to not fulfill that, is lack of character. Now, what it also says is this. On the day he hears it, he's required to speak up and say something if he wants to say something. So here's another thing to think about. Sometimes our silence, in certain situations, our silence on something is tantamount to agreement with it, when we should speak up. Think about this portion of the Torah where it says, if you see a crime committed, the Torah says you're required to speak up and say that you saw it and testify. You're not allowed to say, well, I don't want to get involved. I mean, I know I saw it, but I don't want to say anything. I just don't want to say anything. I don't want to get involved. And I saw, why? Because a potentially guilty person could go free or an innocent person could suffer because of your silence. So there's times where the Torah doesn't allow you any silence. It says, no, if you've seen something, you have to speak up. But you can see why there are those who dislike this text, because they say, well, I mean, a woman's not a free agent then. I mean, she's bound by... No, you know what it says? It says that she's part of a bigger picture. She's part of a corporate whole. And rather than unilateral decisions, she has to work with her husband, yes.
And, you know, we get the Reader's Digest condensed version. And so it can seem like a woman says something and her husband goes, oh, no way. Whereas in all reality, they probably discussed this.
Yes.
And talked about it and you know.
Right. Well, and in a situation where I would say this, you know, in a good marriage, you hope that there is discussion and dialogue about major decisions. That it's not either one of them unilaterally making big decisions without the input of the other in a good marriage. There are marriages where people just do unilateral things and don't talk, and those marriages tend to have a lot of problems and tend not to last as long. If one person goes off making a lot of big decisions without the input of the other, not a good thing.
There was a couple that were, I think it was Johnny Carson. They'd been married 75 years, some huge number. And Johnny Carson was, well, what's your secret? How'd you last 75 years? And the guy goes, well, when we got married, my wife and I sat down and we discussed it, and we decided that I would make all major decisions. And thank God, 75 years, I've never had to make one.
His wife made sure they were all minor decisions. Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, if it works. No, but I think you know, my own inclination here is that, you know, if you're in a marriage, you have to get the input of the other person. It would be foolish to leave out their input. You can do it, but it'd be foolish in the long run. Now, it's interesting. A man. Well, let's go back to something here. The estate. If you have land, and you have, in an agricultural society, you have land that you own, tribal land, and you have cattle. The way the text reads is, he can make a unilateral decision, but when he does so, he's got one above him who's going to come down hard on him if this is messed up, and that's God. So it's not as if it's not because I had an individual say to me, in fact, it was a lady said this to me in discussion of this text. She said, well, I see a lot of men make some crazy, stupid decisions. And they said, you're absolutely right. Guys make a lot of dumb, stupid decisions at times. No debate there. But I said, when he does make a dumb and stupid decision, he has someone standing above him who will thump him, and that's God. It's not as if he gets away with it.
And he has to live with it, he doesn't have anyone to bail him out.
Right, he has to live with it with no one to bail him out. He's stuck, in a sense. At least a daughter and a wife have recourse to say, at the time that he hears it, he can say, no, I nullify the vow. This is not good for us as a family or as a family unit, and nullify. Yes?
If a father or a husband doesn't hear the wife or daughter's vow and then discovers it, say, 6 months later, what is his options?
That when he hears it.
Okay, the question was, if a husband or father hears about a vow that his wife or daughter makes and doesn't know about it, I mean, doesn't know that they made a vow, and then 6 months later he hears about it. The way the text reads is that the day that he hears about it, he has that time period, that presumably 24 hours, to say something. To either by his silence, he goes along with it. If he doesn't say anything. If he says something, if he annuls it by his words, then the vow is annulled.
Thank you.
So it's telling us something powerful about vows and oaths. Now, read along with me. If you have your notes, hopefully you do. Number 1, every man is responsible for any oath or vow that he enters into. The word used in our text is ish and could in certain contexts mean both men and women. In our text, however, the immediate context has the feminine counterpart isha, so that we are accurate in translating the word ish in our text as any man. Number 2, a father can annul the vow or oath of a daughter living in his house. While this vow has been made without the father's knowledge, upon hearing of the vow, the father can have it annulled. If the father refuses to say anything after hearing of his daughter's vow, his silence is tantamount to consent and the vow or oath stands. Now, I want to make this point now that we've read these two, is that some of you are going to say, okay, I'm already married, but I'm hoping that those who are unmarried, those who have children, that everybody will listen to this, because I hope that you'll be able to take some of this and put it into your grandkids, into your kids and grandkids. So even if some of this has bypassed maybe you personally, that others you influence, this will be relevant to. Number 3, any woman who is divorced or widowed is free to take an oath or a vow, and it stands on its own merits. Since a divorced or widowed woman had no male covering, they are considered the most vulnerable in Hebrew Scripture. Number 4, once a daughter is married, her husband has the right to annul any vow she makes. If the husband hears about her vow and fails to take action, the vow stands and she is responsible to fulfill the vow. So in other words, the way the Torah thinks is that a woman should go from the authority of her father to the authority of her husband. And once she goes to the authority of her husband, she's outside the covering of her father. Now she's moved to the covering of her husband. Number 5, while it might seem discriminatory and unfair for a daughter or wife to have her vow overturned by her father or husband, this case law in fact provided vulnerable women with a protective safeguard. In a society where men could easily take advantage of a woman, the ability of a father or husband to annul the oath or vow his daughter or wife had made gave him financial protection, and her as well. So if she had been hoodwinked into some kind of deal, when he hears about it, he can go, whoa, oh, no, not going there. You promised what? She may not have seen all the fine print or understood all the ramifications of the decision she was making. So it gave the primary estate owner, the primary, not the sole, but the primary, a way of annulling it, saying, no, that's not going to work. Number 7, in verses 7 to 9, we have case law dealing with the transition of a daughter from the authority of her father to the authority of her husband. By the way, here's a problem. Here's a difficulty. this is one of those big issue topics. I mean, it's massive. Once, let me say it this way, once a daughter has been walked down the aisle and her father agrees, and he signs off or verbally says everything's fine, this daughter is now under the authority of her husband. Not under the authority of her father anymore at that point. So, seen situations where, fathers want to interfere after the situation. It's like, no, once she's gone under the authority of her husband, that's the umbrella that she falls under. That's huge. Okay? Continuing on here. The scenario goes like this. While under her father's authority, the daughter makes a vow that her father knows about and has not annulled. The eventual fulfillment of the vow is a future event to the extent that the daughter is married in the intervening days. Once the daughter is married and her new husband hears about the vow, he can override the decision of her father and annul the vow. Okay? So even if the father says, yeah, it's all good, in the intervening time she gets married, comes under her husband, he can say, no, I'm not participating. You and I are not participating in that, and annul that. Okay? Authority has transferred. Number 8. Taking insight from Jacob Milgram. Let's distinguish for a moment the difference between a vow and an oath. The one common denominator of oaths and vows is that they both invoke the name of God, which is why they're serious. The reason why these vows are serious is because the person is saying, in the sight of God, I promise on vow or oath to do this. Okay? I mean, the number one vow or oath that we see in our culture that we can see is marriage. There are other types. There's contractual laws and other types of things that people enter into. But the one that most people see the most often is marriage. And overall in our culture, 50% of the marriages end in divorce within our culture, which tells me people are entering into vows and oaths, not considering the seriousness of it, that this is before God. You're taking this vow or oath before God. All right. Any comments on that? Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
So something like, I'll go here on Saturday and do this is not considered a vow or an oath to fall into this category.
I'm trying to understand what your question is.
Unless you invoke the name of God, then it's
not a vow.
Yeah.
Or an oath. Yeah. If you don't invoke God's name. Right. Now,
isn't just speaking it enough?
No, because the issue of personal integrity comes into play when you say to somebody, it's a lie in a sense. If you say to somebody, or failure to fulfill a promise, if you say to somebody, hey, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock, you and I'll meet at 10 o'clock, and I'll be there, okay, for you to help you. And then you don't show up without calling. You may forget, but you still didn't fulfill your promise. That's a promise. But you didn't invoke God's name in that. Whereas with a vow or an oath, you are invoking God as a witness to what you're saying and asking Him to hold you accountable, which is a different category. Yes?
That's the expression you don't hear much anymore, as God is my witness.
God is my witness, right. That's why, in a sense, another place you'll see it, they used to do it, I don't know if they're still doing it, in court you had to say, put your hand on the Bible, and so help me God, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So you're entering into a vow, an oath, taking an oath, to say, I will do what, I will tell the truth. If asked the truth, I will tell the truth. We took an oath of office when you entered in the military, that you would defend the Constitution against all foreign, domestic. It was a whole oath that you took, that you would, now that you were in the military, you were under oath to do what the military asked you to do. Okay? So you don't see those very often though. Those aren't generally seen by the majority of people. The one we see the most often is marriage. Okay? Where people walk down an aisle, say some vows, and then, now they're a husband and wife. All right. There are two primary types of oath. Assertatory and promissory. Assertory oaths are taken when one wants to clear oneself of a charge, like we see in Exodus 22:7 or Leviticus 5:20-25. Promissory oaths, the more prevalent, impose an obligation upon the oath taker. For example, the oath made in 1 Kings 1 by David. A covenant, then, by definition, is a promissory oath. A vow is promissory by definition, but different from an oath in that they are conditional. For instance, a vow would be fulfilled if Jacob returns home safely, if Israel is victorious over the Canaanites, if Jephthah is granted victory over the Ammonites, if Hannah is granted a son, and if Absalom returns home safely. Now look at this. All vows in the Bible are dedications to the sanctuary. That's interesting. Every vow has some connection to the sanctuary. If you go back and read each of these, there's some way in which the sanctuary plays into these particular vows. Okay? All right, any other questions or comments?
What if the son makes a vow?
What if a son makes a vow? Good question.
And maybe he's a young kid too.
Well,
It doesn't say, it doesn't give us any insight into what would happen if a son unilaterally makes a vow.
Well, like let's say that a son joins okay, so there's, in present day now, a son leaves, and this happened in World War II time too, prior. Someone who's under 18 who joined the military in life and falsified their birth certificate, for instance, so they join early. And that's an example of a son making a vow without parents' consent.
True. Our culture would allow for some of that and would try to make ways around that. I don't know. That's a good question, though. See, this is where a rabbinic commentary might come in and try to answer that back. I don't know. That's a good question. Very good question. I'll look at it. Yeah.
I don't know now. When we were raising our boys, I told them to try to instill in them character by saying the same thing we did earlier. If you tell somebody you're going to help them do something, you're going to go help them cut wood for the day, and somebody offers you Rolling Stone tickets. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
So I'd say if you just help them do what you said you're going to do,
Right.
You're only as good as your word.
Right.
People can't stand by what you say. They can't believe anything you say. That was pretty much a mantra as they were growing up. If you said you're going to do something, no matter what, you need to do that.
Right. And I heard this yesterday, and I like this. In the afternoon, I was happened to be with a guy we were studying the book of Proverbs, and he made this statement that righteousness is where you are willing to disadvantage yourself to help advantage another. That's an interesting way of thinking, that I'm willing to disadvantage myself in order to advantage another. That's righteousness. Which is, in a sense, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Even when it's not to your advantage. And maybe even especially when it's not to your advantage. Yes.
Well, I guess response with a question. I would say at the time of bar mitzvah, because then you're considered an adult. But is that a rabbinical tradition, the bar mitzvah?
Yes.
Also,
it's a modern. It's probably about 200 years old on the rabbinic side. It's not very old.
Well, in Proverbs talks about when the son. The servant has more authority than a son until a certain age, when he's considered an adult. What do we know what that age was? Because that probably would be when the oath would be valid for a person who's considered a man, even though he might be still living home if he's actually in a position to do that.
The irony is the Torah here, we got into this discussion with somebody else on, when does the Torah consider a person,
of age.
It's interesting one of the consistent numbers that comes up across the board is 20.
Yeah, that's a very common number.
It's a common number. Serving in the military, a lot of things. 20 is a number that comes up as a number that you have to be at least that age in order to participate. It's a very prominent number. In fact, 20 years of age and older would, if they were under 20, they would die in the wilderness. If not, they would, over 20, they would die in the wilderness. Under 20, they would live. Interesting that was the 20 became, if you just study, 20 is a very prominent number for the cutoff as to when a man can do certain things and when, when he becomes part of the considered adult. Yeah.
This is kind of a weird twist, I guess, but as the bride of the Messiah, how would that play into this?
Ooh, interesting.
In what way?
Well, I guess making a vow that he would give us a little grace. I'm just throwing something out there that I've never really pondered before.
No, go for it.
Well, I don't know. I see a lot of grace in that. Where Messiah, we do a lot of dumb things, even as men. I know it's an oddball thing for us to think about as a man to be a bride.
What's this weed thing you're talking about?
What you talking about?
You've been in prison again, Dan?
Not today. But, you know what I'm saying? It just, I don't know.
Okay, I'm trying to track with you.
Well, you're talking about because we make vows, and if Yeshua is our husband, if you will, we're the bride, and he knows our fallacy and knows our, Dan, you're not going to be able to do that, or Dan, you're not going to do that, and he says you're released from because he can't. We're taking a wild guess.
Is that anything in there?
It'd be grace because
I'd like to do more with it. I'd like to hear more. I mean, more of your thinking. I think the Jeremiah passage, what is fascinating is, he's saying to Israel that despite Israel's unfaithfulness, he always remains faithful.
Right.
Even to his side of the covenant, even when Israel, knowing that Israel was going to be unfaithful.
ahead of time, yeah.
Ahead of time. That's what gets me, is that's where this grace comes in, is that in Deuteronomy, he says, I know that you're going to go in the directions you shouldn't go. And yet I'm still going to maintain this covenant with you, this promise to do what I've asked you to do, what I told you I will do for you, even though I know you're going to be unfaithful. To me, that's incredible. Knowing going into it that they're going to be unfaithful. I mean, if you said to most husbands and wives coming down the aisle, are you okay with the person you married being unfaithful?
They probably have something to say.
They probably go, no, I'm not.
Well, Hosea.
Yeah, Hosea mentions this as well. It's a big theme in Hosea. And yet God, we've mentioned this before. Where in the scriptures, this goes back to something we discussed earlier, connecting it up. Where in the scriptures did God enter into marriage with his people?